Hey guys, tonight we're crawling into something that makes even the plague look polite. You're lying on a wooden table, bareback stuck to blood-soaked linen, while a man in a stained brown robe mumbles a prayer and sharpens a blade the size of a kitchen knife. The air smells like old wine, boiled garlic, and something sourer, probably the last patient. No gloves, no anesthesia, no consent form. Just your leg, trembling under torchlight, and a surgical tool that looks more suited for gutting fish. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your local time and what city you're listening from down in the comments. Always fun to see who's falling asleep with me around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not in a hospital. You're in the infirmary of a monastery. That means your surgeon is actually a monk who's read just enough ancient Greek medical theory to be dangerous. There's no license on the wall, only a faded painting of Saint Sebastian looking way too calm for a guy full of arrows. And the surgical equipment? A small wooden shelf holds a knife, a saw, some metal clamps, a pair of forceps, and what might be a branding iron. Most of it hasn't been cleaned since the last harvest, maybe longer. You're groggy, sweating, and whispering every prayer you ever half remembered. The monk tightens a strap around your arm, not to help with bleeding, just so you don't flail. He says something about bad humors. The ancient theory still rules here. Your body is a stew of black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. Too much of one? Time to balance the soup with steel. Here's the joke. You think he's going to operate on your shoulder. He just nods slowly, then jabs a hot iron into your side. No warning. Your scream startles a bird outside. Now this wasn't out of malice. To be fair to Brother Anselm, let's call him that. He's doing his best. He's following the teachings of Galen, a Greek physician whose theories were written over 1,000 years ago and never questioned. Ever. Galen never dissected a human body, by the way. He worked mostly on monkeys and pigs. But in medieval Europe, if Galen said your spleen was too warm, the solution was to let some blood out and rub a little rosemary on your feet. Your case? Maybe infected, maybe gangrene, maybe just bruised pride. But he's going to try counter-irritation, burn you in one place to make the body distracted from the real injury. Makes you miss modern anesthesia, huh? The room is dim, lit by beeswax candles that drip more wax than light. Outside the cloister walls, the village dogs bark at the moon. Inside, your world shrinks to this bench and the boiling in your side. There's a rustle of movement. You glance left and, a rat. He's watching, perhaps critiquing the surgical form. Historians still argue whether monks like Brother Anselm did more harm than good in the infirmary. Some records suggest they saved lives with herbal brews, crude antiseptics, and rest. Others, well, there are mass graves filled with patients who were probably just treated for headaches. One poor soul was trepaned, drilled into the skull because he saw visions after a fever. We'll get to that later. But for now, you're strapped to the table, and your leg, the one you injured hauling sacks of barley, has begun to swell. Brother Anselm leans closer, mutters a Latin phrase, and picks up the saw. Wait, did he just say amputation? Yes, he did. Your leg might be infected, might not, but he's not going to take the risk. Not because he's heartless, but because medieval surgery had one golden rule. Cut now, ask questions never. He offers you a stick to bite. You want to run, but your legs are lashed down. Irony. At this point, the medieval surgical experience wasn't about survival. It was about surviving the surgery itself. Pain was proof that something was happening. No one knew about germs. They knew about imbalance. Imbalance between hot and cold, dry and wet. Your leg is red and hot? Too much blood. The solution? Get rid of it. Either the blood or the leg. Here's your quirky fact for tonight. Some monks believed the Virgin Mary could guide their hand during surgery if they prayed while cutting. One even claimed the best results came after fasting for 3 days and humming psalms, which is comforting, unless you're the one on the table. Eventually, you pass out. From blood loss, from fear, from the world going white and curling at the edges. Later, you wake to the sound of flies and your own screaming. The leg is gone. And so begins your education in why medieval surgery made even the plague look like a warm bath.
When you wake again, the world smells like vinegar, smoke, and something deeply, fundamentally wrong. You try to sit up, but a sharp, gnawing emptiness yanks your consciousness back to your lower body. Your leg is gone. Where it was, there's now a poultice of mashed onion, cobwebs, and goose fat, held in place by a linen wrap that looks like it's seen more wars than peace treaties. The man watching over you isn't a monk this time. He wears a leather apron, streaked with dried crimson. His hands are calloused. His beard is flecked with what might be soup, and he's chewing a piece of bark like it owes him money. This, dear listener, is your new best friend, the barber surgeon. You may have heard that barbers used to do surgery. That's not a myth. It's your life now. In medieval times, trained physicians believed themselves above such messy business as cutting open people. That was peasant work. So the task of patching, bloodletting, tooth-pulling, and lancing boils fell to the guys who also trimmed your bangs and shaved your bishop. Multitasking at its bloodiest. Your barber surgeon, let's call him Godfrey, holds up a flask of something dark and bitter. You flinch. He laughs. "It's wine," he grunts. "Drink it, or I can rub it on the wound. Either way, we're out of options." You drink. It tastes like vinegar filtered through a monk's sock, but it numbs. A little. Godfrey starts unwrapping your bandages. "We need to clean this," he mutters. "And I need to check for black," as in gangrene, the death color. You try not to breathe too hard, not because of the pain, because of the smell. He uses a rag dipped in salt water and old wine to wipe the wound. You scream. He nods. "That's good. Means you're not dead yet." Here's your mainstream historical fact. The barber surgeons weren't just hacks. Some were astonishingly good at what they did, especially in battlefield conditions. They were trained through apprenticeships, often taught to recognize infection, reset bones, and stitch wounds with something vaguely resembling skill. In fact, the red and white barber's pole we see today, it comes from the blood-soaked bandages they hung to dry outside their shops. Spiraling threads of red and white, literally the colors of pain and patchwork. But there was no consistency. Some barber surgeons were brilliant. Others were basically butchers with a comb. And medieval towns didn't exactly have Yelp reviews. You got who was local, or who owed your landlord a favor. Godfrey pulls out a curved knife. You panic. "Relax," he says. "I'm just going to shave you." "Shave me?" You gasp. "Yeah, hair holds pus," he explains. You blink at him. He shrugs. "That's what I was told." And now, the fringe fact of this section. Barber surgeons sometimes used beaver fat as an antiseptic balm. Why? Because it was greasy, smelled like wealth, and people believed animals closer to water had cleansing powers. Not medical advice, obviously, just medieval logic, the kind that also thought powdered emeralds could stop epilepsy. Now let's take a brief look at the tools on Godfrey's belt. There's a fleam, a sort of folding blade, a cautery iron, a trephine, basically a skull drill, some pincers, and a bucket. The bucket is for you, or parts of you. Best not to ask. He lays you back and mutters, "The worst is over." Probably. Historians still argue whether Barber surgeons like Godfrey extended life or just prolonged dying. Some point to records of successful amputations and recovered burn victims. Others say the survival rate was more luck than medicine. Either way, if you lived, it wasn't thanks to germs being defeated. It was thanks to blood loss slowing just enough not to kill you. Godfrey is humming now, a tavern tune. It would be charming if not for the whole open wound part. He tells you stories as he works, of men who survived arrow removals, of lords who cried more than peasants, of kings who insisted on surgery while drunk on mead, and then thanked him with a coin and a goat. "The goat bit me," he says, matter-of-factly, "worse than any patient." You ask him, groggily, why he does this work. He shrugs. Because someone has to, and monks are too slow. Outside, the wind picks up. You hear bells in the distance, maybe someone's funeral, or maybe just supper. Inside, Godfrey rubs another layer of goose fat on your stump and ties it up again with fresh linen. You'll make it, unless you don't. He claps you on the shoulder. You pass out again.
When you come to, the light has changed. It's colder, pale, the kind of light that makes everything look a little grayer, a little more like a painting of the dead. Your mouth is dry as old parchment, and your leg itches like it's still there. Phantom pain, they'll call it, centuries from now. Today, it's just a punishment without a crime. Godfrey is gone. In his place stands a much older man in a robe the color of old bone. He carries a sack that sloshes. He doesn't introduce himself. He just opens the bag and starts pulling things out. You see a dead pigeon. Then a handful of damp moss. Then what might be crushed oyster shell. And last, yes, he holds it proudly, a waxed scroll of instructions written in what looks like Latin, bad handwriting, and wishful thinking. You're about to meet the next stage of medieval healing: pus, prayer, and pigeon dung. The man leans over your leg, your stump, and nods. "Still pink," he murmurs. "That's good. But we must draw out the corruption." He takes the dead pigeon, splits it in half with his thumbnail, and ties one limped wing to your wound. Now, before you start screaming again, let's be clear. This was once considered top-tier treatment. In the High Middle Ages, some believed that applying certain animals or their excrements could draw out bad humors or poisons. Pigeon flesh, especially, was thought to have cooling properties, which balanced out a hot infection. Logical? Not even a little. Popular? Alarmingly so. Mainstream fact time. This animal cure method dates back to Pliny the Elder, who recorded dozens of such treatments in his natural history. Medieval doctors inherited those texts like holy scripture. So if someone said, "Apply warm bread soaked in mother's milk to the boil," people did it. And it wasn't all superstition. Some poultices did help. Honey, for example, has antibacterial properties. So does moss, to a degree. The problem was that most of the good stuff was lumped in with the, well, pigeon poop. The man now crushes a ball of moss and chicken fat together, muttering something that sounds half prayer, half recipe. He doesn't wear gloves. His fingernails are dark. You don't ask. He smears the paste around the stump. The chill of it cuts through your skin like winter wind. You close your eyes. And here's a fringe detail you didn't expect tonight. Some treatments involved human excrement, not metaphorically, very literally. For abscesses, ulcers, and even eye infections, some texts advised a paste of ash and feces, often mixed with wine. Again, don't try this at home or anywhere. Back in your cell, because yes, this is more monastery than clinic, you hear a faint hymn through the stone walls. The healer mutters, "Best to pray now. The rot comes quickly when the moon wanes." You ask him his name. He says, "Brother Alaric, I serve Saint Erasmus." Saint Erasmus, you later learn, is the patron saint of abdominal pain. Fitting. Brother Alaric hands you a wooden bowl with some kind of broth in it. Smells like leek and despair. You sip it anyway. It scalds your tongue, better than the pus. Historians still argue whether monks like Alaric genuinely believed these folk cures or simply performed them to provide hope. Some scholars point to records where such treatments were given with disclaimers. This may aid the soul, if not the flesh. Others suggest monks were pragmatic, trying everything because they had nothing else. Either way, if you lived, you gave thanks. If you died, you were told it was God's will, not a botched poultice. As the pain dulls to a throb, Alaric adjusts your pillow and says, "Rest. The body heals when it dreams." You try. But every time you drift off, you swear the pigeon on your leg twitches. You're woken not by light, but by heat. A different man stands over you now. Not a monk, not a barber, a stocky, squinting fellow with forearms like cured hams and a face that looks carved from candle wax. His hands are wrapped in old cloth, and he holds something terrifyingly familiar, a pair of iron tongs still glowing orange from the brazier beside your cot. "Time to seal it," he says. You try to sit up. You try to say something eloquent like "wait," or "no," or even just "please." But your mouth makes a dry clicking noise like a clock running out of time. The man leans in. It's better this way. Stops the black from creeping up your thigh. Cauterization. The medieval solution for everything that couldn't be bled, lanced, or prayed away. They didn't just do this for amputations. They did it for arrow wounds, for ulcerations, for tooth sockets, for snake bites, for hernias, and sometimes this is real, for insults to the crown, because nothing says repent like burning flesh. The iron hovers closer. The air smells like a smithy and roast pork. You bite down on a strap of leather handed to you by a sullen novice with acne and averted eyes. And then, contact. You don't scream this time. You roar. Your voice scrapes the walls, echoes down the hallways. You flail, but the same novice pins you with surprising strength. The pain isn't sharp, it's total. It eats your breath, curls your fingers, floods your skull. Then, mercifully, it fades to black. Mainstream fact, cauterization was standard medical practice for centuries. Ancient Greeks did it. Romans did it. The knowledge passed down through Arabic and Persian texts, and medieval Europe took it on with particular enthusiasm, partially because of battlefield medicine, partially because it just looked effective. A sealed wound seemed cleaner, less messy, less likely to drip evil humors into the bloodstream. Now for the strange but true tidbit. Some surgeons believed singing during cauterization helped. The melody, they claimed, soothed the patient's spirit and kept the surgeon's hand steady. One French text even recommended a specific chant about St. Lazarus's boils. So, if you hear humming while your skin is searing, it's not just sadism, it's science. Sort of. You wake later to the sound of flies again. They're very committed to your medical journey. Your leg, what's left of it, is now bound in fresh linen, still faintly smoking. It looks like a roast pulled early from the fire. But the bleeding has stopped. That's something. A young nun brings you water. Her face is calm, too calm. You ask her name. She says, Sister Margot. She sets down the cup and adds, You lived through the fire. That's rare. Then she walks away. Historians still argue whether cauterization saved more lives than it ended. Some medieval records suggest it stopped infection and hemorrhage. Others suggest it often caused more tissue death and even hastened septic shock. But in the absence of anesthesia or antiseptics, it remained a go-to solution, a blazing hope in a hopeless world. And yet, not all doctors agreed. Some, like the great medieval surgeon Guy de Chauliac, warned that cautery should be a last resort. But his warnings were buried beneath centuries of tradition, superstition, and the simple truth that, well, it looked like something was being done. You lie back. You're no longer sure what century it is, or which parts of you still belong to you. You look at the stone ceiling and wonder, how did anyone survive this? You're halfway to sleep when someone whispers near your bed, "Don't worry, the worst is over." You've heard that before.
The next morning, you wake to a rhythmic tapping. Not drums, not footsteps. Something sharper, more deliberate. Tap, tap. You turn your head and immediately regret it. Pain crawls up your spine like a drunk spider. The sound is coming from a man in a faded green tunic, hunched over a table in the corner of the infirmary. He's using a small chisel and mallet on a chunk of skull. Human skull. You blink, you stare, you wish you were still unconscious. He notices you watching. "Ah," he says cheerfully, "you're awake. Ever heard of trepanation?" And now, dear listener, you're about to. Trepanation is the noble, if horrifying, art of drilling holes into human skulls to let out demons, or pressure, or sadness. Depends who you ask. And this man, apparently, has read all the books on it, some of them twice. He wipes his hands on a cloth that's not nearly clean enough, and approaches you with the enthusiasm of someone about to show off his favorite beetle collection. "Don't worry," he says, "you don't need it, yet." Yet. Trepanation has been around for thousands of years. Prehistoric skeletons show signs of it. The Egyptians wrote about it. By the time you're lying here in the 13th century, it's become a legitimate, if terrifying, form of neurosurgery. Mainstream fact, trepanation was often used to treat head injuries, especially swelling from blunt trauma. Medieval surgeons believed that pressure on the brain caused madness, seizures, or hallucinations. The solution? Remove a chunk of skull, let the brain breathe. Simple. Of course, they had no antiseptics, no clean tools, and no understanding of actual brain function. So, while some patients did survive, there are records, many probably didn't. The man with the chisel, we'll call him Master Rule, sets his tools down and begins explaining the 4 signs that you might need your head opened like a gourd. They include loss of memory, sudden melancholy, visions of angels or beasts, twitching of the fingers. You realize you have 3 out of 4. You tuck your hands under the blanket just in case. He picks up a small T-handled device, an actual trephine,
with a round blade designed to slowly carve a circular window into the skull. It's surprisingly elegant, surprisingly clean. He demonstrates on the bone at his table. Tap, twist, scrape. You hear the whistle of metal on bone. It sounds like someone sharpening regret. Then comes the fringe fact of the day. In some remote villages, it wasn't surgeons doing this, it was midwives. Yes. In cases of possessed infants or babies who cried too long without cause, the local healer might scrape a shallow hole in the baby's head to release the devil. This was, fortunately, extremely rare, and even more rarely successful. You stare at Master Rule, your mouth dry. He smiles. The key, he says, is not to go too deep. Comforting. Historians still argue whether medieval trepanation had any true medical benefit, or was largely symbolic, a ritual of cleansing disguised as surgery. There's compelling archaeological evidence that some patients healed, but there's also compelling evidence that many didn't survive the scraping, the bleeding, or the infection. Master Rule leans in. Would you like to see a skull with 4 holes? The man lived for another 5 years, we think. You shake your head too quickly. Pain flares behind your eyes. Ah, that's sign number 2, he says, nodding gravely. He walks away, whistling. You're left staring at the ceiling again. This time, you imagine it with a small circular skylight. You close your eyes. The tapping begins again.
You're beginning to understand something fundamental about medieval medicine. The only constant is pain. Whether it's in your leg, your stomach, your teeth, or, God help you, your skull, the answer always seems to involve iron, heat, or faith. Sometimes all 3. Today, it's your leg again. Godfrey is back. Time for a proper dressing, he says. You sigh with cautious relief until you notice what's beside him. A saw, a small iron hook, and a bucket filled with vinegar, herbs, and something floating you refuse to identify. You ask, "We're not cutting more, are we?" Godfrey raises a brow. "Only if we have to." You're not reassured. He begins unwrapping the linen. It sticks. It pulls. It takes half your willpower not to scream. The wound is, miraculously, still pink and not black. Good news. Except it smells like rot and wine and despair. You mutter something about wishing for anesthesia. Godfrey laughs. "You are the anesthesia," he says, then hands you a stick. Welcome to Medieval Amputation, Part 2, where you're awake, alert, and hopefully not squeamish. This time, he explains,
He's not amputating, just trimming. You nod, confused. Then you feel it. A slice. You convulse. The stick cracks in your teeth. Godfrey mutters something about needing to remove the dead edge so the living flesh can breathe. You didn't realize flesh needed breathing room. Mainstream fact. Medieval surgeons often performed debridement, which meant cutting away dead tissue from a wound. It was painful, brutal, and shockingly effective, sometimes, especially if the surgeon knew what he was doing. But there was no guarantee, just instinct, superstition, and experience. Godfrey doesn't stop. You count strokes. 1, 2, 5, 7. Each one shorter, sharper, crueler. Then he grabs the hot iron again. You moan, not this, not again. He cauterizes the new cuts. The room fills with that familiar smell, burning meat and old leather. The novice beside him quietly offers you a mouthful of something sour. It numbs your tongue and blurs the edges of the world. Fringe detail of the night. Some medieval doctors believed letting the patient scream helped purge demons. Yes, literally. Screaming was therapeutic, not for pain, but for the soul. And they weren't subtle about it. There are records of monks urging patients to cry out so their inner devils could escape more easily. You scream, so maybe that's a bonus. The pain dulls eventually, not because it's over, just because your body is retreating inward, trying to survive. You start to feel floaty, like you're watching from above, like you're just a sack of meat wrapped in linen, surrounded by firelight and muttering men. Godfrey sews the wound shut with catgut. Each stitch feels like a bite. Almost done, he mutters, though time no longer means much. Finally, he wraps the stump again, this time in clean linen, soaked in wine and herbs. You catch a whiff of rosemary, maybe thyme. It would be pleasant if it weren't your leg inside the bundle. Historians still argue whether patients who survived these surgeries truly recovered, or simply limped along until their bodies gave up weeks later. Some accounts describe amputees surviving for years, even returning to labor. Others suggest most simply rotted from the inside out, killed not by the injury, but by the treatment. Godfrey pats your shoulder. You're doing better than most. You believe him. Sort of. As he leaves, the novice lingers. Tomorrow, he whispers, you get the leeches. You blink. What for? To balance your humors, of course. You close your eyes and sigh. Your dreams that night are strange. A river of blood, a saint with a saw, a pigeon sitting calmly on your chest. You wake with your jaw clenched and your mouth full of splinters from the stick.
The leeches arrive at dawn, or perhaps it's earlier. Time is hard to track when every hour tastes like metal and salt, and your dreams involve birds whispering medical advice. A small wooden bowl is placed on your chest. Inside, several black, glistening leeches, writhing like overcooked noodles with ambition. The novice doesn't explain. He just nods solemnly and begins rolling up your sleeve. You pull your arm away. Why? Too much blood, he replies flatly. You're imbalanced. Of course, the four humors again. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. If you're sick, you're out of balance. If you're recovering, you're still probably out of balance. If you're alive, it's suspicious. There's no winning. The prescription? Drain the excess blood, no matter what the problem is. Fever? Bloodletting. Bruised rib? Bloodletting. Sadness? Yep, definitely bloodletting. The leeches are applied to the soft flesh near your elbow. They're shockingly strong. Their mouths latch on with a suction that sends a cold ripple down your spine. And then, slowly, you feel it. The pull, the warm seep of your life leaving your arm. You try not to panic. Mainstream fact, leech therapy or herudotherapy was widely practiced throughout the medieval world. Doctors believed it could cure almost anything, from nosebleeds to madness. Leeches were easy to keep, easy to breed, and required no sharp instruments, just patience and a small tolerance for horror. The good news? Leeches inject a mild anticoagulant, which keeps blood flowing and can reduce clotting. The bad news? You're bleeding, on purpose, for no clear reason. After a few minutes, your skin around the bite turns pale. The novice nods, satisfied. They like you. You don't like them. He places a bucket under your arm, just in case, and mutters something about Saint Apollonia protecting the vessels. You stare at the ceiling. There's a spider spinning a web in the corner. You feel a strange kinship. And now, for your fringe historical tidbit. Some physicians recommended measuring the success of bloodletting by the color of the blood. Bright red? Too hot. Dark red? That's your melancholy. One 14th century manual claimed the ideal bleed would be the color of fine burgundy. Another recommended stopping once the patient looked less swollen with pride. The bar is, shall we say, flexible. Godfrey enters partway through. He eyes the leeches and chuckles. "Better them than me," he says. "At least they don't talk back." He checks your stump, nods approvingly. No blackness, no smell. That's rare. You appreciate the optimism, even if your arm feels like it's melting. Historians still argue whether bloodletting ever truly worked. Some suggest it reduced fevers by lowering volume and pressure. Others claim it was sheer placebo, making the patient believe healing had begun, so the body followed. But in terms of actual medical benefit, limited, often dangerous, sometimes fatal. But it was everywhere, rich or poor, monk or peasant. If you bled, you were being cured. After the leeches have had their fill, the novice removes them carefully and drops them into a jar of vinegar. You flinch. That feels personal. Your arm continues to drip slowly. They don't bandage it. Let it ooze, the novice mutters, cleansing. You're lightheaded, maybe from the blood loss, maybe from the thought that just yesterday you were a man with 2 legs, an intact arm, and 0 experience with pond creatures sucking your life out through a vein. You lie back, exhausted. Outside, bells ring. Inside, the candle sputters. You drift, wondering how many more cures you'll survive.
You don't know how long you've been lying here. Days, weeks. Time slips like warm broth through your fingers. All you know is that the monks stopped counting your prayers. The novice has stopped recoiling at the smell of your bandages, and your stump hasn't turned black. That, apparently, is a miracle. But today you're getting a visitor. You hear them before you see them, the rustling of starched fabric, the slow creak of leather gloves, the unmistakable clink of glass bottles. When the figure finally steps into the room, you nearly laugh, because it's a beaked man. Long black cloak, wide-brimmed hat, leather gloves, and a giant bird-like mask with glass goggles for eyes and a curved beak filled, supposedly, with fragrant herbs. He looks like a giant, terrifying crow who wandered in from a bad dream. "Don't be alarmed," the muffled voice says through the mask. "I'm here to keep you well." Too late for that, Birdman. This is the Plague Doctor, a now iconic figure of medieval medicine. And though your illness isn't the Black Death, he's making his rounds anyway, because in times of disease, everyone's a suspect, especially the already injured. Mainstream fact: the famous beaked plague mask was developed in the 17th century, but versions of it were conceptually present much earlier. The long beak was meant to filter miasma, the bad air thought to carry disease. Inside the beak, they'd stuff lavender, mint, camphor, or even crushed roses. Sometimes vinegar-soaked sponges. Does it work? Well, no. But it smelled better than rotting corpses. The doctor kneels beside you. His movements are deliberate, calculated, ritualistic. He pulls out a rod and gently lifts the edge of your bandage. Sniffs, grunts. "Still pink," he says. "That's rare." You're starting to suspect that rare might be medieval code for miraculous and statistically improbable. He uncorks a bottle and pours a bit of liquid over your wound. It fizzes. You bite your tongue. He nods. A bit of aqua vitae, brandy and wormwood, cleans and stings. It mostly stings. Fringe detail. Some plague doctors believed rubbing crushed emeralds into the skin could protect you from disease. Others wore toad amulets or carried dead puppies. Yes, actual puppies, believing that certain animals could draw the poison out of the air and into themselves. It was, in a way, the most tragic version of an air purifier. The doctor examines your pupils, your tongue, even the veins in your arm. Then he sniffs his own sleeve and mutters, "Still clean." You ask, muffled, how does one become a plague doctor? He straightens. You mustn't fear death, only disease. Death is inevitable. Disease is inconvenient. He leans in. Besides, the Pope pays well. Historians still argue whether plague doctors were actual physicians or just glorified undertakers in costume. Some were trained, many were not. In fact, during outbreaks, cities often hired anyone willing to go near the sick, including barbers, students, and desperate clergymen. This man? Probably a mix of all three. Before leaving, he adds one last poultice, this time a smushed ball of juniper berries and garlic wrapped in cheesecloth. For the scent, he says. You're starting to smell like a medieval salad. He bows slightly and departs, his beaked silhouette vanishing into the flickering hallway torchlight like a ghost that took a wrong turn at a masquerade. You exhale, long and slow. Somewhere inside you, the fear shifts. Less of dying now, more of surviving like this. The novice returns and offers a bowl of barley broth. He only visits the lucky, he says. You glance at the door where the plague mask disappeared. Define lucky, you whisper.
You're upright today. Well, almost. You're leaning against a wall made of damp stones, cradling what remains of your leg like a disgruntled cat. The air is thick with the scent of horses, sweat, and steel. You're no longer in the monastery. You're in a field tent stitched from rough canvas and smelling vaguely of mildew and fire. Because now you're in a war zone. Don't ask how you got here. You barely remember. All you know is that someone said the army needed men with experience, and apparently surviving amateur surgery made you a veteran. You're not here to fight. You can't even balance. You're here to watch. And what you see today will haunt you more than the knife, the fire, or the leeches. Because battlefield surgery was its own circle of hell. A soldier is carried in. His chest is cracked open like a cupboard. Blood pools under him in a lazy spiral.
The surgeon barely glances up. Arrow? Pike. The surgeon grunts, rolls up his sleeves, and reaches into the wound. He's not a monk, not a barber, not even a plague doctor. He's a field cutter, a job somewhere between battlefield miracle worker and human butcher. His tools? A saw, a scalpel, and an alarming number of towels. He doesn't hesitate. He's seen worse, today alone. Mainstream fact. Medieval field surgeons operated during and immediately after battle. They had no anesthetics, little water, and no time. Patients were laid on hay, mud, or whatever surface wasn't currently burning. Most died of shock. The rest, infection. He pulls the weapon out and tosses it aside like bad meat. His assistant, who looks about 12, presses hot iron against the wound. The man on the table jerks, screams, and is still. Alive? Unknown. Next, the surgeon shouts. And there is always a next. One man has a leg hanging by a tendon. Another has a broken arrow lodged in his jaw. One poor soul is raving, clawing at the air, blood bubbling from his mouth. No one looks at him for long. And here comes your fringe fact. Medieval battlefield surgeons sometimes stuffed spider webs into wounds to slow bleeding. They believed the webs helped clot blood and held healing power. Some even mixed them with vinegar and soot for extra purity. You watch as another leg is amputated. The surgeon uses a two-man saw while the patient bites a strap of leather. There's no ceremony, no prayers, just a focus on speed. Time here is a luxury no one owns. You hear someone vomit. Maybe it's you. Historians still argue whether battlefield surgery advanced medicine or just reinforced the belief that everything should be cut off. Some say these surgeons were innovators, forced to improvise under extreme conditions. Others claim it was organized guesswork, brutality dressed in urgency. But it worked, sometimes. You're offered a role, holding a torch. You do, with trembling hands. You shine the flickering light over a man's open belly as the surgeon stitches with catgut and curses under his breath. You think about Godfrey. You think about Brother Alaric. You think about the pigeon. And somehow this still feels worse. That night, as you rest on straw beside a wheezing mule, you wonder, was it better in the monastery? Or here, where at least no one pretends it's divine? A young soldier limps past, blood dripping into his boot. He looks at you and says, "They say if the surgeon drinks before cutting, it hurts less." You ask, "For him or for you?" He grins, "Yes," and vanishes into the dark.
The field tent is silent now. Silent in that eerie way that only follows too much screaming. Outside, the fires are low, the horses restless, and the sky hangs like wet cloth, dark, heavy, swollen with secrets. You wake to the sound of someone urinating into a wooden bowl not 3 feet from your head. A grunt, a splash, and then, too yellow, too dry. You blink, bleary. What? The man turns around, holding the bowl up like a holy relic. Your urine, he says matter-of-factly. You might be dying, or eating too much cheese. This, dear listener, is your introduction to the strange science of urine charts and astrology tools. Because if you thought bloodletting was guesswork, wait until you meet medieval diagnostics. You're no longer on the operating table. Now you're a patient in recovery, sort of. You're somewhere between alive and being observed. And part of that observation means analyzing your bodily fluids like tea leaves. Mainstream fact, uroscopy, the study of urine, was a cornerstone of medieval medicine. Doctors would collect a sample, hold it up to the light, swirl it in a glass flask, and pronounce judgments based on its color, smell, thickness, and even the presence of bubbles. There were entire color charts, some more elaborate than cathedral windows, listing 20 to 40 shades of pee and what they meant. Too pale? Weak kidneys. Too red? Fever. Black? You should probably start praying. Your attending doctor, a man in velvet robes and a beard that seems to move independently, holds your sample to the firelight and mutters. Then he pulls out a small brass sphere covered in symbols, an astrolabe. Because urine analysis was only half the diagnosis, the stars handled the rest. Venus is descending, he says. Your liver is anxious. You stare at him. He sighs. Mars rising. That means heat in the bowels. We'll need to cool your temperament. How? You croak. Less garlic, he says gravely. This is real, by the way. Medieval physicians believed the alignment of planets directly affected health. Astrology wasn't a hobby, it was a medical tool. If the moon was in Aries and you had a headache, bad timing for surgery. Mercury in retrograde, avoid purging. Saturn near Leo, no leeching until Tuesday. Fringe tidbit of the night. Some doctors believed urine could be read without seeing the patient at all. A messenger would deliver a flask of pee, and the doctor would divine everything from disease to personality. There are even records of diagnoses made entirely by mail, with no patient contact whatsoever. Talk about remote healthcare. The man in robes continues. He charts a circle with chalk on the table beside you, aligning runes and zodiac signs. I suggest a cooling diet, he mutters. Barley water, pears, and fennel. No lamb, no wine, absolutely no ginger. This is real, by the way.
Medieval physicians believed the alignment of planets directly affected health. Astrology wasn't a hobby, it was a medical tool. If the moon was in Aries and you had a headache, bad timing for surgery. Mercury in retrograde, avoid purging. Saturn near Leo, no leeching until Tuesday. Fringe tidbit of the night. Some doctors believed urine could be read without seeing the patient at all. A messenger would deliver a flask of pee, and the doctor would divine everything from disease to personality. There are even records of diagnoses made entirely by mail, with no patient contact whatsoever. Talk about remote health care. The man in robes continues. He charts a circle with chalk on the table beside you, aligning runes and zodiac signs. I suggest a cooling diet, he mutters. Barley water, pears, and fennel. No lamb, no wine, absolutely no ginger. You nod weakly, as if you have a menu to order from. Historians still debate whether this astrological medicine delayed actual progress or served as a necessary bridge between the mystical and the empirical. Some argue it helped people feel in control of the uncontrollable. Others say it let doctors avoid responsibility entirely, blaming Saturn for gangrene. The robe man leaves you with a small parchment of instructions. You can't read it. You think it says something about your bile needing to be less ambitious. That night, your dreams are full of stars, not metaphorical ones, actual constellations whispering insults. You wake with a start. Beside your bed, a new bowl. Steam rises from it. You hope it's soup, but it smells familiar.
You are moved again, not by horse nor cart. They carry you on a door, a literal wooden door, ripped from its hinges and hauled between two coughing monks like a crude litter. The door creaks with every step, groaning like it too is tired of this war. You ask where you're going. Hospital, one monk mumbles, of the Holy Mercy. You are not reassured. Because in medieval Europe, a hospital wasn't what you think. It wasn't white sheets and antiseptic and polite beeping machines. It was a place to die with dignity, or sometimes just die with witnesses. The building looms ahead like a penitentiary church, tall, stone, and grim. No glass windows, just slats for air, and a wooden cross above a door that hasn't been closed in decades. They carry you inside. The first thing you notice is the smell: cloves, rot, sour milk, and despair. The second, the sounds: coughing, moaning, someone reciting prayers in Latin so fast it sounds like auctioneering for souls. You are placed on a straw mat. This, dear listener, is your bed. Mainstream fact: medieval hospitals were often run by religious orders, not physicians.
Their primary concern wasn't healing the body. It was preparing the soul. You were fed, prayed over, and occasionally treated. But most of all, you were observed for signs of divine intervention or moral failure. Because if you got sick, it was probably your fault. You're given a crucifix, then a bowl of broth, then, weirdly, a chunk of old cheese. You eat it all. You're not sure if that was a test, but if it was, you passed. The nun assigned to you, Sister Benedicta, is gentle but clinical. She checks your stump and nods. Still warm, praise be. She dabs it with vinegar-soaked linen. You hiss. She smiles. Pain means you're blessed. Somehow, you're always being blessed here, usually with pain. A friar walks the aisles with a censer, swinging smoke over the sick. It smells of frankincense, but also something more burnt. He chants softly. You ask Sister Benedicta if there are any surgeons here. Oh no, she says. We don't allow cutting here. Too messy. The Lord prefers clean departures. You blink. Departures? She pats your hand. Only if necessary. Here's your fringe fact. Some medieval hospitals kept death sheets, linen strips blessed with holy water and wrapped around those close to dying. It was believed the cloth could absorb sin through the pores, acting as a sponge for transgressions. Some patients would fake dying just to get the cloth early. In the corner of the room, someone wails softly. Another prays out loud. And near the far wall, two friars argue about whether a particular patient died of fever or soul looseness. Historians still argue whether these religious hospitals were more helpful or harmful. Some offered the only available care to the poor and injured. Others refused practical treatment in favor of penance and prayers. The quality depended entirely on where you were and who was watching. Sister Benedicta returns with a relic, a bone, supposedly from a saint's toe, and holds it to your chest. For healing, she whispers. You feel nothing, except the weight of it pressing against your ribs. That night, you try to sleep beneath a wooden crucifix. The moonlight slants in through the slats in the wall. You dream of bloodless wounds and clean, painless departures. You wake with a fever. The cheese was a mistake.
You wake up, soaked in sweat and shame. Your mat is damp, your blanket twisted into a knot beneath you, and your mouth tastes like you've been licking a horseshoe. Everything aches. Your skin pulses like it's trying to crawl off your bones. Sister Benedicta appears, calm as ever, holding a small ceramic bowl filled with something brown and clumpy. No broth today, she says. You need a purge. You eye the bowl. It
eyes you back. What's in it? You croak. Senna, vinegar, powdered horn, and a dash of sheep's bile, she replies with gentle authority. You close your eyes. She waits. You drink. And thus begins the next trial in your holy journey, purging, the medieval art of forcibly emptying the body in every possible direction. Welcome to medicine by evacuation. Mainstream fact: in the medieval medical tradition, purging was considered vital for rebalancing the humors. If you had a fever, melancholy, bad dreams, a swollen knee, or just looked at a cleric funny, the answer was often the same: induce vomiting, or diarrhea, or both. The goal? Clean the system, expel the evil, make room for holiness. The purge hits in about 10 minutes. You barely make it to the chamber pot, which, for the record, is a dented pewter bowl shared between 3 patients and rinsed weekly, if lucky. When it's over, you lie back on your mat, hollowed out and humming faintly. And just when you think it's done, a physician walks in. But he's not like the others. He wears deep red robes, a tall black hat, and rings on every finger. His shoes are soft. This man has never touched a wound in his life. And that's exactly the point. Because this is a university-trained physician, and unlike the barber surgeons or monks, he deals in ideas, not bodies. He doesn't touch you. He doesn't come within 5 feet. He gestures at you vaguely and turns to Sister Benedicta. What's his urine like? Thick, smells of goat. He nods sagely. And his stool? Uncooperative, then volcanic. The physician says, without blinking. Melancholic imbalance, caused by dampness of the liver, possibly moral weakness. He scribbles something with a feathered quill onto a small scroll, rolls it up, and leaves without a word to you. Fringe fact of the night: many medieval doctors believed illness came not from bacteria, but from sin, thoughts, and bad air. They wrote entire treatises on how too much reading could unbalance your phlegm, or how eating lettuce on a cloudy day could cause paralysis. Some even suggested that certain diseases came from staring at frogs too long. Historians still argue whether these physicians advanced medicine by formalizing knowledge or stalled it by refusing to engage with the body itself. Some created early medical schools and manuscripts that shaped future science. Others just copied Galen's work with added footnotes about demons. Back in your corner, you begin to recover. Sister Benedicta brings you water. The doctor says your bile may clear by next moon. You thank her. She nods solemnly. If not, we'll try the worms. You don't ask. Instead, you stare at the ceiling, count the wooden beams, and try to remember a time before your body became a battlefield for herbs, bile, theology, and men in expensive hats. Outside, a bell tolls. Inside, someone weeps into their bread. And you just breathe carefully, because you're not sure what part of you still works.
The hospital is full now. Cots are squeezed between windows, tucked under stairs, spilling into hallways. Every groan echoes twice. The walls weep with moisture, and the wooden beams above your head creak like they know something you don't. You haven't seen outside in 4 days, or maybe 5. Sister Benedicta no longer smiles. She moves like a shadow in the shape of a woman, efficient, silent, tired. But this morning, something is different. There's a murmur near the chapel door, a shuffling, a dragging sound, then laughter. Not joyful laughter, spectacle laughter. Because today the hospital has become a theater. A man with slicked back gray hair and a red doublet walks in carrying a leather bag. Behind him, 2 apprentices dragging a bench and a box of tools. He bows theatrically and proclaims, "Today we shall perform a marvel of modern healing." And just like that, you've been upgraded. Welcome to the world of public surgery, where the audience includes fellow patients, wandering monks, and anyone bored enough to watch a man have something cut off for free. Mainstream fact: in medieval towns, and especially during the Renaissance, surgery was often performed in public spaces, market squares, hospital wards, or even theater stages. It was part healing, part performance, part education. The more dramatic the wound, the larger the crowd. Success meant tips. Failure meant a funeral. You are not the main event today, thank God. But the man 3 beds down is. A giant boil has grown on his shoulder, pulsing, purple, and the size of a plum. The surgeon addresses the crowd. An imbalance of humors. We shall correct it. He holds up a knife. Someone in the back applauds. The man on the cot is not conscious, or maybe he is, and just wishes he weren't. The surgeon slices. Pus fountains forth, coating his apron. He squeezes the shoulder like a wineskin. More fluid. A cheer. The apprentices bow. You gag. One monk faints. Someone takes notes. The fringe fact tonight? Surgeons often took their cues from butchers, not physicians. They learned anatomy from pigs and cows.
Some even trained by dissecting executed criminals when allowed. There are surviving manuals that include both how to amputate a leg and how to carve a goose, sometimes back to back. The surgeon turns and offers to examine your leg. "A clean stump," he cries. "Whoever did this had a steady hand." You mumble, "Godfrey." He nods respectfully. "A rare one." Then he's gone, off to his next victim, or patient, depending on the outcome. The crowd disperses. A man with half a jaw mutters, "I've seen puppet shows with more grace." Historians still debate whether public surgeries truly helped educate future doctors or merely entertained the masses. On the one hand, they provided rare opportunities to learn. On the other, they blurred the line between healing and humiliation. Some say the practice led to advances. Others call it medieval reality television, live, bloody, and lacking reruns. Sister Benedicta cleans the mess in silence. You ask her, "Why do they cheer?" She shrugs, "It's better than screaming." That night you don't dream. Your mind is too full or too empty. You lie awake, listening to the snoring of strangers and the soft patter of blood dripping from someone's cot onto the floor. You wonder if the monks will perform your next wound like a puppet show. You hope not. But you're not optimistic.
It's raining now. You hear it before you feel it. Soft patters on the stone roof above, trickling down the walls, sliding through the gaps in the shutters. Cold air creeps in, and with it comes that unmistakable medieval cocktail: wet wool, moldy bread, and slow decay. You're not sure if you're getting better or just used to being ill. The hospital is quieter. Not empty, never that, but subdued. A kind of resignation hangs in the air, like a curtain pulled too many times. Fewer groans, more silence, and in that silence you begin to notice someone new. She's not wearing robes. She's not carrying tools. She's not supposed to be here. She crouches beside a girl's cot, whispering in her ear, placing something small and wrapped in cloth into her hand. The girl takes it without speaking, clutches it to her chest, and closes her eyes. The woman stands, sees you watching, and approaches. She looks like the forest, hair like bark, eyes like moss, and on her belt a pouch full of smell: herbs, roots, powders, things the monks here wouldn't name out loud. "I heard you lived," she says. You nod. "Godfrey told me. You're lucky." You shrug. Your stump throbs in reply. "I'm called Elspeth," she whispers, "and I'm not supposed to be here. You've just met a wise woman, or a cunning woman,
Or, if the bishop's in a bad mood, a witch. She unrolls a little bundle, dried marigold, crushed willow bark, and something sticky and green. "You've been cauterized like a lamb," she says. "Time to be healed, not just closed." She works quickly. The mixture stings, then cools, then disappears beneath new cloth. Mainstream fact. Women healers were central to medical care in medieval villages. They passed down knowledge through generations, often using herbs, poultices, and rituals that predated Christianity. Midwives, herbalists, and village wise women cared for the poor when no monk or doctor would. But as organized medicine became male, university-trained, and increasingly religious, these women were pushed to the margins, labeled superstitious, dangerous, heretical. Some were fined. Many were burned. Elspeth hums as she works. Not a hymn, something older. You feel the pain loosen, just a little. She gives you a vial. If your fever comes back, drink this, not more than a thimble. "What is it?" you ask. "Foxglove, mostly, and patience." You stare. Foxglove is poisonous. She smiles. Not if you respect it. Here's your fringe fact. Foxglove contains digitalis, a compound that affects heart rhythm. In small doses, it can stabilize. In larger ones, it kills. Modern medicine eventually isolated it. Elspeth already knows. Historians still argue whether these women were persecuted for their power, their gender, or simply because they made too many men uncomfortable. What's certain is this: many saved lives, more than they were allowed to admit. She turns to leave. "Wait," you say. "Won't they punish you?" She shrugs. "They always do, but not today." Sister Benedicta watches from the far doorway. Her eyes betray nothing. But later, your stump is left untouched for the first time in a week. Elspeth doesn't return. She never does. But the green salve is cool, and you sleep, dreamless, deep, and without pain, for the first time.
You wake slowly. No pain, no panic, just the soft, pulsing ache of a body that stopped fighting long enough to breathe. The rain has stopped. Sunlight leaks through the shutter cracks in long, golden blades. Dust drifts like tiny spirits. And for once, the hospital is quiet, not with death, but with rest. You sit up. That alone feels like a rebellion. Sister Benedicta appears, carrying a bowl of warm milk and oats. She nods approvingly. You look less pale. You manage a smile, your first in days. She feeds you slowly, with the care of someone who has seen too many die after getting too confident. "Don't think you're healed," she mutters.
You're just not actively rotting. But there's pride in her voice, a flicker. You sip the last spoonful and whisper, "Thank you." She nods, then lowers her voice. "There's talk you'll be moved soon." "Where?" "Home, or somewhere like it." The thought makes your chest tight. The world outside feels mythical. But the wound is closed, the fever is gone, and your body, however changed, is your own again. You're a survivor. But of what? A fever? An amputation? A parade of scalpels, saints, leeches, planets, and unsolicited animal parts? No. You survived medieval medicine. Mainstream fact. The average survival rate for surgery in the Middle Ages was not encouraging. Without antiseptics, anesthesia, or germ theory, most procedures ended in infection or death. But those who did survive, they often did so through a wild mix of luck, folk wisdom, spiritual faith, and sheer, stubborn human grit. Fringe tidbit. Some medieval patients who recovered were paraded through town as signs of divine favor. A man who survived an arrow to the chest might become a minor celebrity, praised, poked, and sometimes paid in bread and beer. No one's offering you bread, but you'll take breathing as enough for now. Historians still argue whether medicine in the Middle Ages was cruel, misguided, or simply the best people could do with the tools they had. The truth? A little of each. You lie back, fingers curled into the blanket. You think of Brother Anselm, Godfrey, Alaric, the plague doctor, the boy with half a jaw, Elspeth, and Sister Benedicta. They were all trying to save someone, even if they had no idea how. And now, dear listener, we slow down, because even history needs rest. So here you are, still, quiet, breathing into the soft dark of your room, with only the memory of old stone and rainwater echoing gently behind your eyes. You've walked through blood, fire, and vinegar. You've bitten wood, burned flesh, and met ghosts in the shapes of doctors. You've heard prayers stitched between screams. You've smelled the sharp sweetness of rosemary in a room where no one expected to live. But now it's done. You're not bleeding. You're not stitched. You're not floating between pain and dream anymore. You're here. And strangely, so are they, the people who healed you, or tried to, or failed to. They hover in memory like soft footsteps in the night. And even if their methods were terrifying, most of them meant well, or at least didn't mean harm. You've seen the worst of it, the bone saws, the leeches, the beaked masks and pigeon poultices. And yet, somehow, you survived. You are, against all odds, whole. Maybe not in body, but certainly in spirit. So breathe in, slowly, and breathe out. You're back in your own bed now, not straw, not stone. The blanket is warm, the night is calm. The only thing cutting into you now is a sleepy yawn. Let it carry you. Let the darkness be gentle tonight. And when you wake, be grateful for antibiotics.